Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation entitled LGBT and Religion, Queering Web Archive Research. My name is Jesper Verhoef, and I am a historian interested in applying computational techniques to digital archives to discover patterns. I'm based at Erasmus University Rotterdam, and this research I will talk about today is made possible in particular by the National Library of the Netherlands. There's a bunch of people working there, present here these days as well. I worked with the people, well, among others, I worked with Iris. She'll present the poster here these days as well. I also was sponsored in a way by the Center for Advanced Internet Studies in Germany, which provided me with a generous grant. So, let's start with the premise behind my project. As historian Ian Milligan, now I didn't know he would be here today. This could be a bit awkward. Oh, he's actually in the room. Oh, there he is. I'm sorry, Ian. As historian Ian Milligan and others have compellingly argued, archived websites are instrumental to write any history of the 1990s and beyond, which is particularly true of marginalized groups. Notably, the World Wide Web has been revolutionary for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and all other people whose sexual or gender expression does not conform to the hegemonic norm. These groups of people are usually referred to as LGBTQ or queer. I will use these terms interchangeably. Now, from the outset, queers have taken to the web in massive numbers to satisfy a plethora of needs. And therefore, to understand queer reality, and queer cultural heritage, one has to study online cultures. Alas, much like other websites, queer websites can go offline in a heartbeat. This book was published, this was a physical book in the 1990s, third edition already, late 1990s, and then a little over a year after that, someone wrote an Amazon review, which is still online, right? Love the memory of the internet. What fun can be had spending endless evenings typing in addresses of various websites that can no longer be found, which of course is problematic, the digital dark age. We already heard about it earlier today. Others have argued, therefore, that it is urgent to preserve queer websites, otherwise we will be confronted with a queer digital dark age. However, to date, too little has changed. And therefore, in an article that has provisionally been accepted by the journal Internet Histories, I argue that both libraries, on the one hand, have to start preserving LGBT online life, whereas scholars, on the other hand, have to start consulting collections that have already been created, such as the LGBTQ Lives Online collection hosted by the UK Web Archive. Didn't know you would be on this panel, actually. Luckily, the National Library of the Netherlands has acknowledged this relatively early. Its web archive laudably contains a special collection of over 400 Dutch LGBTQ websites. Many of these websites are hosted by interest groups, and on the bottom of this slide you see 5 examples, such as Trans United, geared towards transgender people. Interestingly, the collection also contains about a dozen websites geared towards religious queer people, which I'll get to in a second. Now, all of these websites have been crawled once per year for at least the past 5 years. Some a bit longer, but once per year for at least the past 5 years. And due to the availability and the quality of data, which is sometimes below par, we're all aware of that, right? I have decided to first focus on the recent years, and today I'll focus on 2020. Which means today I'll talk about a subcorpus of exactly 200 websites, and I'll present preliminary findings concerning the year 2020, and mainly focus on the process. So, how did I arrive at the results? Now, of course, one begins with a research question, which in my case is, what does the Dutch queer web sphere look like, and how has it changed over time? As you see on the slide, a web sphere is a set of topically related websites. Many of you work with this concept, of course, and this seems to apply rather clearly to the corpus at hand. I am particularly interested in the networked structures. the network structure. So which websites have constituted this sphere and how have the relationships between these websites evolved? And I researched those networks by means of hyperlinks, which are, of course, the constitutive element of the World Wide Web, which was stressed before the break as well in this room. Now, extant studies have underscored that hyperlinks are acts of association or conscious act of connectivity, akin to footnotes. Consequently, hyperlink analyses yield insights into the hyperlinked identities of Dutch queer websites, particularly the networks they formed. Hyperlinks allow for analyses that can speak to many intriguing issues. For instance, let's see whether it's actually on the bullet I've written down here on the paper. For instance, it can speak to the recent scholarly debate about the claim that LGBT life online is predominantly transnational. Recently, a special issue was published about this. Now, I would beg to differ based on the results I gathered. But I will not deal with this question today. Though I can say that the Dutch queer network is in fact remarkably national in 2020. The vast majority of hyperlinks tied Dutch queer websites to other Dutch queer websites rather than websites based elsewhere. Now, in the remainder of this talk, I will focus on the final question, i.e. on the relationship between the ties between the religious and non-religious queer websites. But to do so, I first have to go over the research process. Now, in short, what I did was the National Library had already developed a script, which I helped to fine-tune to extract all hyperlinks of these 200 websites that form my corpus. These websites are the source website, right? That's the first column to the left. Here you see two source websites, clubchurch.nl and coc.nl. Now, the second column shows the websites they linked to, the targets. And I think in line with Niels' presentation before the break, it's similar numbers. In total, this file contains over 30,000 lines. So tens of thousands of lines we're dealing with. I spent weeks scrutinizing the targets manually. If a site was no longer online, I Googled it to establish what type of website it was. Of course, I was particularly interested in links to other LGBTQ websites, which I have turned light green here. So, for instance, zonder stempel, without mark.nl is also an LGBTQ website. These websites could be Dutch or non-Dutch, such as the Belgian URL that starts with Zizo in rows 343 and 344. Now, please don't pay attention to the other colors. They serve a different purpose. What is important now is that when I was done, I aggregated the results, which resulted in a list of the most popular websites. And that's the final column, right? The in degree shows the number of different websites that link to it, at least once. To give an example, please have a look at row 347, which indicates that 18 websites link to the website zijaanzij.nl, geared towards lesbian women, and COC was one of those 18 websites. This is just an example. Here I present you with a more clear overview, the aggregates. So, no surprise for the Dutch people here in the room, sorry. The most popular LGBTQ website was coc.nl. That's an advocacy group. No less than 81 out of the 200 websites in the corpus refer to it, or link to it rather, at least once. Now, to put this into perspective, the following table, so the table next to it, shows that 128 websites were linked to by at least 10 other websites, right? They have an in degree of 10 or more. To keep the network visualizations, which I'm about to show you, legible, in the following analysis, I will only focus on websites that were linked to at least 5 times, okay? So keep that in mind, please. I used Gephi to make sense of the data, And I think it's pretty common. The size of the nodes in this network graph corresponds to the in degree, so the number of different websites that link to it. So for this reason, COC is the biggest node, right? It was referred to 81 times. Now, I want to stress that my analysis is very much work in progress. For now, I want to focus on the outcome of a modularity, i.e. a cluster analysis. And I will not get into the specific Gephi settings. I've mentioned them on the slides. You can tinker with these parameters, of course. More important for now is that whichever many clusters I created, okay, so irrespective of the number of clusters I created, 3 clusters consistently popped up. In the bottom right corner, without labels that indicate the names of the websites, because that would result in a cluttered visualization. But you have to believe me, in the bottom right corner, you see websites that are predominantly predominantly provide information about HIV and AIDS. A second cluster is the bluish one on the left side. I can use this one, yes. Yeah, I have to audience. Here, right? Yeah. Right? Bluish. Okay. It's been a long day. Consists of websites geared toward transgenders. Okay, that's a really, really strong cluster. I'll write an article on that. I will not go into that today. Much could be said about these clusters, but today I'll focus on the religious cluster. The names are up there, the red ones. And I've zoomed in a bit. Okay, this is the same visualization, zoomed in considerably. And in case you cannot read the labels, let me read 5 of them out loud. And I have translated Dutch names into English. gayinthechurch.nl, Euroforum LGBT Christians.eu, homopastor.nl, christianqueer.nl, transandreligion.blog.nl. I think you get the gist. Remarkably, all websites in the corpus catering to religious queer people clustered together strongly, complemented by the religious websites that link to it. In other words, there was a clear, distinct queer web sphere, even though most of these websites, save for a couple on the periphery, right, are also very much part of the overarching LGBTQ network. There's no time today to go into detail, but let me also briefly point out, and I find this very interesting, and I think religious scholars would agree with me, scholars studying religious topics, that this analysis also brings to the fore other interesting findings that warrant further attention. Most prominently, there is a strong relation between Catholic and Protestant websites, which suggests that the common cause, as it were, of being both Christian and LGBT apparently trumps intra-religious differences, right, between Catholic and Protestant people. Moreover, it is worth pointing out that there are a couple of websites in the corpus geared toward Muslims and or queers with a different ethnic background and religious beliefs, which are also part of the cluster, but they are more on the periphery, such as colorground.nl, which you see at the bottom left. That's the one. Which brings me to my final slide about the next steps I plan to take. Okay. I don't know. Oh, I had to wait. The next steps, yes, I will continue to work on this, in my view, very intriguing case study and the others I mentioned before, which means I will conduct more and different types of network analysis, both synchronically, like I showed you today, and also diachronically. I am a historian after all. Moreover, I plan to conduct interviews with the organizations behind these websites, right, to pair quantitative methods with qualitative methods, and also get a grip on what their views are and how these have evolved. If their historical hyperlink profile, as I like to call it, does not reflect their views, why is that? Right? There has to be an explanation for that, which will enable me again to qualitatively examine and further develop interpretations generated by these hyperlink analyses. But for now, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.